This is Duke University.
Not at all. Yeah.
So these are less questions than they are observations that I would love to hear your thoughts on.
Okay. That's fantastic.
So, not in the sense that they're critiques, just in the sense that I can't formulate a question.
By all means, let's not have any critiques.
No, I love the talk. I thought it was wonderful.
Thank you.
So the first thing is it never ceases to amaze me as a humanist how surprised we always are to find, and I'm not accusing you of this because it may have been a rhetorical strategy, how surprised we are to find that self-expression is very, very essential to people and is not actually a luxury.
That's right.
That these, you kept saying this is required, they can't afford it, they spend all of their what was the phrase, the wonderful phrase you used, their minimal disposable income on fashion. We would, we never think of that as being odd for, as you say, a wealthy white woman, but we think, well, why on earth would you do that as a person with an immigrant with low income? Even as humanists, even as people who study self-expression, we have a hard time imagining that self-expression can be so essential to people that they will put all of their disposable income into it. And I'm thinking that's probably just kind of an Arnoldian residue of the 19th century, I would imagine. So that's the first observation.
Well, I don't know what you mean by that, but I think it's more than that, right? I think it's a very particular relationship that we can have to subjects that are classed differently, that hold them to a higher degree of economic rationality than subjects that we imagine have the leisure or the disposable income to have these other kinds of concerns, right? Mm-hmm. And part of this, I want to hear what else you got. Part of this is sort of combating, even though I don't really cite them in this essay, very familiar arguments about whatever, why do people shop at Walmart when it's against their own self-interest?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was the first observation. The second observation, and I study religion, and I keep running up against this thing as well. The point that you made about or the sort of point you were getting at, and again, I'm not accusing you, I'm not saying this is necessarily your idea. The idea that we keep running into that because the owner of the salon requires them to be fashionable, it must therefore be an oppressive requirement, which is why it's so weird to keep hearing them say it gives us freedom when it's required by the owner of the salon. And I think the idea that something that's required can't also allow you to express your own freedom is a very, very Western idea, that you have to throw off all kinds of imposition in order to be free. And in fact, there's plenty of people who don't define freedom as throwing off all of the impositions of other people, right?
Yeah,
so
that's really useful.
Well, the example you used of touching the Hindu women touching their parents' and grandparents' feet, right? That this is a social requirement, but it's not a social requirement that they necessarily experience as oppressive.
Right. Nor, I would say, it is the fact that they remit large parts of their income, right? Yeah, that's super useful. I don't know if you want me to respond. I think those are super useful.
I'm trying to think where Salma Mahmood talks a lot about that. I'm sure you know her, an anthropologist, and she talks a lot about the sort of liberal idea of freedom as being the same thing as the removal of shackles or the removal of outside influence, and how limiting that idea is.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
By all means.
Hey, hi.
I love the talk. It's awesome. I had one observation and one question. The observation part was the Klein and Siegel. I had a Klein and Siegel moment over the summer where I had a really cheap umbrella and I found a biodegradable, compostable umbrella that withstands winds up to 60 miles per hour.
Did it make you coffee in the morning?
For the cost, I think that it would. And I guess there is sort of a question in this observation, and it is that as the women talk about moving from fast fashion into this more conscious space of shopping, is there any interrogation of sort of the hegemonic capitalist imperative to be a better shopper and spend more? Because the umbrella has all these special qualifiers that have social capital, because people be like, oh, that's a beautiful umbrella. I can be like, yes, and it does all of these things too. And that gives you distance in the way that fashion is.
I mean, I think that that's an interesting question. And, you know, they are routinely exposed or in company with clients in the salon for whom those kinds of purchases may be very meaningful, right? And I remember one of the first things that sort of shifted what I thought I was doing when I was collecting these ethnographies in the salon was a moment when a client was complimenting Nina's sweater, but in a kind of, in a bid, I think, to actually, you know, have some kind of intimate contact, right? But also in a bid to be, you know, sort of like, if I was gonna put it in a super crude way, like, you know, you're doing my nails and your sweater is also really nice, right? And Nina, who was very, very savvy and articulate about the particular nuanced dynamics of class and race and fashion within the salon, said, oh, it's handmade, right? Totally not true, right? So at that moment, right? I mean, I think that she was, you know, and the woman was like handmade, and then you could sort of see, I mean, I don't want to impute things to this woman, but you could sort of see like handmade, like did she make it herself, right? Like handmade, and she went on to say like, I got it at this boutique that's around the corner from the salon. Not true, right? We talked about it later, not true. But I think in that moment, she was consciously activating all these ideas about these different kinds of shopping publics that are happening in the salon. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
I think it's interesting just the way that we move from this fast fashion to the answer being, well, then we'll get the local made thing from bamboo from this little farm in Thailand, which is my umbrella's from, which is awesome. Yeah, I'm really proud of my umbrella, which is sad.
No, it's not, right? Because I feel like one of the things that we can take away from this is like these women are like, I'm into fashion, I love my outfit means a lot to me, right? They don't have that kind of funny shame that the Klein and Siegel subject, right, have about their own attachments. In fact, like, Klein has this whole thing about like, I'm writing this book about fashion, I hate fashion, I'm even interested in fashion. And Siegel's not like that, right? Siegel's like, I'm really committed to fashion, right? But it's like, she's like, I don't write this book, I don't even care about this stupid thing, right? These women are like, I love this. This is so important to me. So I got excited remembering this, and then I was going to say something else. Oh, okay, here's the other thing that I wanted to say to you, which is that, and I don't know if this is an answer either, but I think that part of the way that the Klein and Siegel stuff works is that they imagine that they are going to redraw their relationship to textile workers by withdrawing from the relationship for textile workers, right? In other words, that they're going to cause or minimize the harm that they do by no longer participating in the actions that they see now as connected to the harm, which was never their intention to cause harm in the first place, right? So it's an ethics based on a kind of consequentialism, right? It's like an ethics based on this very particular kind of responsibility. And it also, part of the other thing that goes along with this is believing that your own specific consumer choices have a great deal of impact and consequence and influence in the broader world, right? For these nail salon workers, right, I don't think that they see their relationship to these textile workers in the same way that's constructed in Klein and Siegel, right? And we could talk about, if you guys are interested, more in how I think they situate themselves differently, right? But they situate themselves differently. So they don't feel that particular kind of consequentialist responsibility to change their practices by shopping differently, right? They have something else that they're doing, right? It's not that thing that they're doing, right? The other thing is, and I think that you get daily lessons in this if you're a nail salon worker, right, is that I don't necessarily think that they see themselves as agentive, right, as full of agency vis-a-vis global capitalism as do this other subject, right? I don't think they think that the way that they shop is going to shift stuff, right? And yeah.
Even that idea is a kind of luxury. The idea that you could influence the whole global capitalist system by not shopping at H&M or Zara is itself a sort of, even that idea is kind of a luxury. I'm so important that I'm going to influence the whole global capitalist system.
Yeah, right, and I don't think is because of the way that the nail salon workers are situated in relationship to this, I don't think that that's one of the ways that they think about themselves. So they're just, it's not, for anything, it's clear to their families that the particular kinds of labor that they can do, right, will support whole families, right? So, and many of these women were doing jobs or aspired to do jobs that they would have found more desirable if they had stayed in Nepal, but they are really, because of the way that, the commercialization of regimes of beauty are drawing patterns of migration, right? Their families understand, right? They and their families, to go back to your original point, understand, right, that this is something that they can do for their families, to do this kind of work, right? And part of that has to do with part of this has to do with the way that globalization is playing itself out, say, in their families in Nepal, right? Which is that, they see what's constructed as the benefits of participation all around them, right? Which is to say the chance at some kind of upward mobility, and they're the people who can help their families participate in it. So they don't want to withdraw from globalization or capitalism, right? Their hopes are that they can join it more fully and reap its benefits, right? So it's a different thing, right? It's just a differently constructed thing. Yeah?
Second question.
Hey. Sorry.
No, it's okay, it's my fault. I had a question on the role of individuality, because I used to live in New York, and I was told when I moved there that I had to go and get a cheap manicure, and I found my little shop that I went to, and it was definitely a place where you could get a manicure and pedicure for $23, and everybody was dressed in black.
Yeah.
And as a result, just given my personality and how the workers were, I never talked to them.
Yeah.
I don't know if my nails were ever done by the same person twice.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if part of the dignity for them as they express it and being able to wear their own clothing is that they don't get to fade into the background in that way.
I think that that's absolutely true, right? I think if you're wearing like copper leggings, right? Copper leggings.
All the
I
clothes you
mean,
described
who
were
in this
bright.
room feels like maybe lots of you guys. But like, I'm not gonna pull off copper leggings, right? I mean, so there is, I think that in some way, the desire to be visible, right, or is strongly associated with, like when Deepa says she likes bright colors, right? Like, I don't think that that's disconnected from what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Say one other thing about that kind of salon that you're describing, right? The salon that I've been collecting this ethnography in is very particular kind of salon within the different kind of salons you would find in New York City. And it sounds like that when you're talking about, and this comes from Millian Kang's work, not mine, is she calls them like uptown, midtown, and downtown salons. And uptown, she's kind of, the one I've been working in is downtown, but she's signifying a kind of like uptown vibe, right? That's like, fancy people getting their nails done. Her midtown ones are more like people who this is sort of part of what they have to do to be professional, and so they're going in for this manicure and pedicure, and there's not a lot of like the emotional, affective transaction of intimacy in those exchanges, right?
Agreed.
So, yeah, because it's a factory, so it has its own, right, it has its whole own thing, but in certain ways, and it's less, it's like the tips are pretty routinized, like that like you're gonna get probably 10% from that, right? This is again what Kang says, right? So it's not this thing like that if you have some sort of incredibly emotional encounter, maybe you'll get 20%, right? Or 25%, right? So it's different. I think the dynamics are different, and I haven't done work in those kinds of salons, so right, so I don't know yet if then wearing the uniform feels different in that situation. Good question.
I loved your lecture, and Jim, it was also so great to hear from you as well. And I went to a fashion and sustainability conference last year, and I was a little frustrated with just the significant amount of emphasis on changing consumer behavior.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that changing individual consumer behavior is nearly as effective as collective advocacy movements that press institutions. I mean, like what Duke is doing, and I mean, I just think that that's so wonderful. And so, my guess that's kind of an observation, but how is it that we take what you're talking about and try to infuse it into this movement? And also the second point I wanted to, just another thing I wanted to bring up too, I recently was sent a blog last week of a, I don't know if some of you saw this, it did go a bit viral. A young woman had started an experiment where she was going to wear the same outfit every single day for a year. And she did. She just wore a shirt and jeans and everything. And she was talking about how she wanted to make a feminist argument and that too much of her time would be consumed with shopping. And I think minimalism is a wonderful thing, but I also think too that there was no self-reflection on her part on why she was able to get away with that, which of course had to do in part with thin privilege, because she was very thin, white privilege, class privilege. I mean, she said, no one ever questioned me about the fact that I was wearing something every day. And then at the same time, also, I feel like, to that extent too, it's like we're also discounting the power that the fashion industry can have and the amount of jobs that it provides and the wonderful work that a lot of these women do. Not that I understand what her journey was, but yeah, how do we bring that back, that conversation back from individual journeys and consumers and to collective advocacy, like what Jim's doing and a lot of other people
I
are
think
doing?
there are like a whole array of those
Yeah.
answers to that question, and actually, Jim might want to speak to it too, because part of the agreement that Duke has signed into very explicitly states that this is not about withdrawing from Bangladeshi garment factories, right? Like unlike Disney or something, it was like, okay, fine, we're leaving, right? Like that was the way to solve the problem, right? So maybe would you? Yeah.
It's a complicated problem, and how to affect it. I know in terms of your comments, I took what I said. It's ironic how fast fashion seems to imprison and degrade workers at the beginning of the supply chain, but often provides a sense of freedom and pride to workers at the consumer end of the supply chain. And but the real power, in my opinion, rest with, at least in our case, the trademark owners. And I think that's fairly unique, because in a lot of cases, the retailers and the manufacturers are in fact their own trademark owners, like Nike as an example. And
So you're saying there's a kind of pressure that you have that's not true?
yeah, we have leverage that
Yeah.
others can't employ nearly as easily, and universities, I think, are in a sort of unique position of having moral and sort of integrity goals and missions that in many cases they take, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but in many ways they take much more seriously and to heart than companies do, sort of pure capitalists do. And it's ironic for me because I'm in the retail business too. So it's often, there's often some conflict there. But anyway, I'm sure I didn't answer the question, but it's
No,
just
it's
more,
okay.
more observations.
Yeah, no.
Okay, I'm not going to answer the question, but I'll say some things that I've been thinking
Sorry, it was such a big question.
about. Yeah, no, I mean, but it's also a really important question. So one way of thinking about it is that we really want this kind of work, right? But I would say we want all the different kinds of people doing little things, big things, medium things, right? I think that part of where I was trying to end off is by saying, like, I don't think we need to say, like, this little one isn't big enough to matter, right? We only want the big ones, right? I think we want all of them. But a couple of things I would say about that is that insofar as my point about saying like in the wake of Rana Plaza, the shift to the question about consumers was really interesting to note, right? And then the turn to these authors of these books as pundits who were really all over the place after it meant that the answers to those questions were shaped in this really particular way. So in that moment, it goes beyond what Klein or Siegel is doing in her own like personal shopping habits, right? Which I think, you could say like, okay, fine, like do what you can do, but like whatever. Right? To informing a public discourse about how other people should respond, right? So insofar as that discourse becomes part of the way these questions are framed and shaped, maybe at that point, right, we want a more complicated understanding both of consumption of this stuff, right, and a question of like what ethical consumption could mean or not mean, right?
No, that's great. I actually just remembered, I just was reminded, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, they're a media criticism site, and they analyze news coverage. And so they actually wrote a piece on the coverage of the plaza and how it tended to focus, how it tended to focus far more on consumer behavior than on corporate actors like Walmart, and how that was problematic because it was deflecting attention from like the institutions and people who probably had a lot more to do with the fire than,
I mean, insofar as, and we could, talk about like how we feel about this, maybe we want to talk about a different time, about how we feel about the idea that it's in the aftermath of crises that things can change the most. Right? We might want to think about that as a structure that how we feel about that. But insofar as that is, we want to take that as a possibility. If the conversation is shaped in this really particular way, right? Maybe it could be shaped in a different way. And I would also just say that, you can read in these reports, Zara is opening up a store every single day somewhere in the world. They are making like gajillion garments every single day. Elizabeth Klein is not buying all of those, right? There's just like a failure to imagine. There's a failure to connect for Elizabeth Klein. There's a failure to imagine, like, and maybe this has to do with part of what you were saying earlier, right? Is that the idea of the consumer is so narrowly like this very particular, I'm going to say this in a shorthand, right, which I would never write down, right, but like in a sort of middle class leisure shopper who's shopping for like pleasure and whatever, this really particular form of self-expression, right, that so much doesn't match in the same articles that are saying there's a store opening up somewhere in the world, right? And a lot of times you'll see, like, actually I think Klein does this in her book, and she'll say something like, well, American consumer practices are now happening in China. Well, maybe, right? But maybe something else is happening, and we would want to know that if we were going to respond to this problem, right? Does that help at all?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Thank you so much.
I can't tell whether that's a hand or a cell phone situation. Okay.
It's a cell phone situation.
It's a cell phone situation.
Anyone else? Well, Jessamyn, thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you so much for coming.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.